So our next speaker will be David Kyle, an associate professor of sociology at the University of California, Davis, which those of you who have traveled may not know is about an hour up the road from Berkeley towards the Central Valley. His research and teaching cover global movements of people and ideas, and over the past 8 years, he has developed a course called World in a Cup, in which he teaches global social issues through the history and sociology of coffee. He's also an affiliate of the UC Davis Coffee Center, an interdisciplinary group of 50 scholars at UC Davis studying coffee from a chemical, physical, and biological perspective, but also economic, social, cultural, and psychological. So I was not aware of the existence of a UC Davis Coffee Center. So I've learned about two institutions by doing this, the FICA Academy and this interdisciplinary group of researchers at Davis. I'm very pleased to welcome David to talk to us about the comparative sociology of coffee. So welcome.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here and inviting me to the organizers. It's really a wonderful opportunity. I think when I was invited, it was only because of the Coffee Center connection, not knowing that I've taught at University of Lund for 2 summers in a row about 20 years ago, and then my son went to University of Copenhagen. And I have a lot of Danish and Swedish friends, so I jumped at the chance. I was like, okay, great. So I just like this title. I can't say that here's to you, Mrs. Olson. It makes a lot of sense, but lo and behold, the poster in my hotel room was from the movie that the song comes from, so I don't know. But what I like about this is that I don't want to make Mrs. Olson the key figure in my talk, but she kind of represents a lot of things going on here. And so I just want to highlight that. And also the subtitle, I could have come up with different things, but Bay Area coffee culture put through the commercial grinder, which is kind of the capitalist commercial evolution. First of all, where it came from, what Peet's was doing to push back, and then the evolution of that, and then I compare it to FICA. So that's what this is about. So first of all, I want to mention that we have an older history, a very important one, of coffee, and it was specifically Folgers, which is one of our big iconic coffee companies, and it begins during the gold rush time. Eventually moves to New Orleans in 1960, but this was a very big part of Bay Area coffee culture, and it itself went through different iterations that would be a lens by which we could view American economic, political, cultural, and social life. How the coffee was made, how it was consumed, all that. So the idea of using coffee as a lens to one's social and economic any place is really globally, but we really need to start our specific story back in the 1850s. I like Stina's observation that, this is how you understand Sweden. I'd say coffee or perhaps tea is a great way to understand almost any place, especially all the rituals around it. So Peet's, just a quick overview. Peet's is kind of the key coffee company here, of course, that kicks it all off. And as some of you may or may not know, Dutch immigrant, learned it from his father. And, here was this famous quote, which, I came to the richest country in the world, so why are they drinking the lousiest coffee? And I can imagine it was really lousy. And so opens Peet's Coffee and Tea in 1966. But of course, they were importing more than just the coffee. It was also partly the social ritual, not exactly fika, but there was an educational moment. There was time to kind of talk and discuss and what today we might call nerding out on coffee. They were very much nerding out on it. The taste was very, very important. But pour-overs, the way they were making it just took time, and they were testing and experimenting with different things. And of course, it's in this context of Berkeley, where we're at right now, that I can't go off on a tangent here too much, but it kind of fit with the times, I would say, in the 1960s. Not that I was there, but I think it's all of a piece. There's something new and innovative happening here that is about community. And you can imagine a time like this where solidarity and community and innovation and creativity and all that coming together was very, very critical. And then it's out of that Pete's company here locally that three young entrepreneurs, Jerry Baldwin, who I just met a few months ago, Gordon Bowker, and Zev Ziegel approached Pete for training, and he trains them, and they become essentially some of the vanguards of the third wave coffee and the coffee that we enjoy, at least through not the United States. But first, okay, so that's Pete's. First, we need to understand what was this American commercial cultural context or grinder. I'm playing around with the word here. In the 1960s, that was not just the quality and the taste of the coffee. In other words, what was the social, commercial context that Pete's had to swim upstream against? That's what I want to understand here. So this commercial grinder of American coffee culture was, first of all, the coffee break itself was based on the fact that a tie-making company in Colorado wanted to force the workers to drink coffee for more productivity, but not pay them for that time. I don't think it was exactly a fika moment, and this is kind of running throughout this presentation, in that we get a lot of elements that superficially are kind of the same, but then fundamentally not. And that's what we want to meditate on and kind of think about here a little bit. But then it ruled in favor of the workers, which meant that you had to have a coffee break now, a paid coffee break. The takeaway is that the coffee break is just a cultural phenomenon. I think Stina also brought it out. There is an industrial intersection there as well with the fika. It's a legal and economic artifact of caffeine-powered capitalism. Let's see. And can't forget the quote by Michael Pollan, a local guy here, we might say, would be an understatement. Capitalism and caffeine are hand in hand. Your employer not only gives you a free drug, but also time and space to take it because it pays off. They get more work out of people. Well, that's a little bit cynical, I think, but there's an element of truth there, okay. Well, Mrs. Olson, and I'm going to see if I can play this. Oh, okay, this might actually work. So some of you know how many of you know who Mrs. Olson is, right? I just have to say Mrs. Olson. Okay. And so many of you don't know, right? This was one of the most iconic television ads from the mid-60s to well into the 1980s. And the setup was almost always the same. And we're going to see one of them. There were several versions of it in different scenes, but it always featured Mrs. Olson, a Swedish neighbor or what have you, almost someone that probably would have invited you to a fika, but this is what we got, what in the context of Pete's. Let's see if this works.
I told you the PTA's coming tonight, George. I'm too busy for nonsense.
Hey, baby.
Oh, sorry.
I told you the PTA's coming tonight, George. I'm too busy for nonsense.
PTA, huh? Gonna serve your coffee?
You joke about my coffee again. You hear, Mrs. Olson, like a broken record.
Well, as one committee member to another, maybe you should try Folger's coffee.
Why Folgers?
They blend it special. Folger's uses mountain-grown coffee.
Mountain grown?
Yeah, that's the richest kind. Bet your husband tastes the difference.
Mrs. Olson, I'll try Folgers on him tonight.
How about another cup, honey?
You second on my coffee?
Tastes kind of great tonight.
See? No trick to making coffee. All you need is a better coffee.
Folgers.
Try Folgers, the mountain-grown coffee. Mountain-grown for better flavor.
I told.
By the way, especially for you Swedes and other Nordics here, just go on YouTube and Google Mrs. Olson, and you can find there's a string of them. There's even one where they put them together for 30 minutes. They're all the same way, basically the same narrative. The husband typically is something like, your coffee absolutely sucks, and I'm leaving. And then bewildered, doesn't know what to do, and then Mrs. Olson saves the day with the mountain-grown coffee thing. Now, what's interesting about this, why I could have chosen any number of them, but this one was interesting because it was in the context of a PTA committee meeting, and they second the coffee, right? So it already has this context kind of built in. Now, of course, Swedish coffee culture was already known for its quality at this time, I believe. But of course, this is not a real Swede, and for those of you, does that accent sound real? Not really, right? Well, this is an American actress faking the Swedish accent. But what we also get are other elements here that I want to bring out. So that we're appropriating the taste, the reputation, and transferring. This is just the typical marketing 101, right? Co-optation. But then we get time, coffee as a productivity lubricant. So it's in the context of a committee meeting, or often he's running off to work. They need their coffee, right? But the coffee has to taste good and kind of be efficient at the same time. And then the less obvious one is the talent managerial part, not just this one, but running throughout, especially in the Mrs. Olson commercials here, there's of course, a very gendered kind of performance happening, that making coffee is a kind of talent. But Mrs. Olson, in a way, maybe with an echo of Fika, is that it's not about, how good you make coffee, just use the right coffee, right? So this is the commercial cultural grinder that transformed even Swedish coffee reputation into productivity metrics. Okay. A little bit of a delay here. Okay, so now back to our story. So I'm going to go through 3 stages of this transformation. You can read the slide. I'm only going to hit some highlights here. Just want to say that there's kind of step 1, which is once the kind of originators went on to found businesses, a really big takeoff is when Schultz, who takes over the company in '83, goes to Italy, falls in love with not just Italian coffee, but Italian coffee culture, right? So once again, it's about importing the cultural elements of it, but of course it's through that commercial grinder from day one and continuing evolving. And those of you who have been to Italy, you know that Starbucks, well, even the Vini, I don't know, however they call their, it has little elements, but it's nothing like an actual Italian cup. And of course, Italy has famously banned Starbucks. It's been a very difficult relationship. I don't know if the one in Milan, I was in Milan right before it was getting ready to open. I don't know, did it actually stick? I don't know. Let's just say the Italians are not too impressed with our version of Italian thing. Anyway, there is a major step forward because we do get better coffee, out of this around the country and maybe in other parts of the world. I'm only going to speak about the United States. I don't want to offend anybody. But I'm from Florida, and let me just say, I didn't grow up with a lot of good coffee, and in this first phase here anyway, it was nice to get kind of decent coffee anywhere. And so this is a major step up. You also have the social meaning has shifted somewhat here in that it is being integrated into American productivity, but in a way that's more through the knowledge economy. So it's less about kind of staying awake at your machine or your assembly line, and more about a kind of social lubricant, but very much within a productive workplace kind of vibe, we might say. I'm going to get back to that a little bit later. So this stage one of the grinder is the Italian communal cafe culture processed through American individualization and convenience norms. So this third place concept was marketed, but structure encouraged individualized consumption rather than communal pause. So it's a sort of hybrid, neither here nor there, leveraging some aspects of the communal vibe, but still very much catering to the American need for a highly individualized kind of version of this. Stage two, we get the third wave craft movement in the early 2000s, and here's where we get the takeoff of, these are like the grandchildren of Pete's and some of the founders, right? And become institutions of their own right here. We get the craft characteristics, we get even more barista culture, we get the Specialty Coffee Association, and it really becomes an art. And if any of you have seen any barista competitions, they're quite impressive because it's not just the quality of, it's not the tasting of the coffee. They're talking, how they're doing it, what they understand about the coffee, the origins of the coffee. It's kind of all connected, and it goes back to that original DNA, back to Pete's. That kind of knowing where things come from, knowing what you're doing, and then also continuing to innovate. So you get this genuine quality revolution. So at this point, it seems like the promise is fulfilled, and that this high quality coffee, artisanal craft, slower ritual, educated consumers comes into being. This third wave appeared to realize Pete's original vision of European quality with American innovation. But the question is, what happens to the spaces, and we might say in a time space, right? Every space in the sense of when we're consuming is a moment in time, and every moment of time in terms of a lived experience, whether it's consuming food or drink, the space and the time are kind of one and the same. It's a moment, right? So what happened to those spaces, and what else got imported or edited out, we might say, in these spaces? Well, the spatial transformation in this case was where work colonizes leisure, and I'll talk a little bit more about fika, but I'm not the expert on fika, but we might start thinking about Stina's wonderful presentation that we just heard all about fika. Here, it's kind of taken to the next level where the work is brought into this third space more and more with Wi-Fi connections, places for laptops, the way it's arranged. Not necessarily comfy for conversation. That's Phil's, that's a different story. But really around both a kind of aspect of communal life, so it's not alienating. There are many benefits of that space in terms of community, and it could go either way, but the vibe is very much, we understand you're here to do some work here. It's not about making a connection with people necessarily. If you're doing that alone also is probably because there is an agenda, right? So this is where you get the paradox where you get this beautiful ritual, the pour over, all of that, but the commercial grinder is kind of slowly taking over. And of course, I'm not really getting into the corporate model of, say, Starbucks or the exponential increase, or where it became, literally there's a Starbucks across the street from each other, and then it's also in the Safeway grocery store. And without even getting into that aspect of it, really talking about just kind of at the level of how we experience these spaces by design. But they're also reacting to elements and changes, trends in American culture and society, and also global investments as well. So stage three, we get this acquisition wave, and this is the most recent one. It still makes my heart drop a little bit here And I'm sorry if I'm the bearer of bad news, those of you that might not know this, but read it and you can see this is what's going on here, folks. If you don't know these companies, you can look them up. JAB, a lot of these are conglomerates. So you might not know the brand or the name of the conglomerate because that's kind of the nature of a conglomerate. But then like companies that they buy can go out and then buy other companies. So Keurig and Peet's are now in bed together, or when, I don't know what the relationship is exactly, but let's just say that we're now at the little cups of the, right? And now Peet's has those too, and everybody. I'm really dismayed, just as a local note here, that when I go into our local grocery stores, even ones that kind of specialize in more upscale goods, more and more of the coffee section is being taken over by the cups. And more plastic, more, I don't think this is what Peet's had in mind exactly, right? I'm taking a guess. So, the irony, et cetera, I don't want to belabor this too much here. But the cycle kind of completes itself here, because what began as a rejection of Folgers-style mass market ends with absorption into a similar corporate structure, or not similar, but a kind of beast of a corporate global culture with different quality tiers, same ownership model. JAB's portfolio includes both Peet's, craft coffee, and Keurig single-serve pods. That's what I was saying. The quality improved, but the independence was lost. This is happening with a number of things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that overnight you're drinking bad coffee or that it's all bad. In fact, that's what the investment is in, to kind of keep this up. But we know over time, and this is a story of what's happening over time, that commercial grinder, what happens next when we have the pods, right? I'm also a musician, and I play synthesizers, and Moog, which was the handmade synthesizers in North Carolina, just got sold to a conglomerate too. And so it seems like everything I love is being sold to a conglomerate. So it's a little extra. Yeah. Okay, so what's the lesson from gourmet coffee evolution in the US? Well, you're tasting time, not just coffee. You're the time space aspect, and of course that is important to the profit centers here, of controlling, manipulating, managing that aspect of it. So we get the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. As a recap, taste alone isn't everything, but I think you all know that. We're not just tasting coffee, we're tasting the temporal dimensions of it, the social meaning of it, and the cultural values. Connection, community, and the time we take together matter as much as the beans themselves. I don't know why it's getting cut off. And so these are shaped by complex social, economic, political, cultural forces that baristas, coffee shop owners, and even companies like Peet's can't really swim against for too long. These are really very strong forces, undercurrents. And, don't have time to get into the mechanisms of why that is, but it's sort of the way the game is put together here. We have really big fish gobbling up smaller ones, and some of those are coffee producers. So pivoting here a little bit, so what travels here? What successfully moved and what doesn't? Well, the obvious thing is what we got as a benefit out of it. I want to get to the next one, though, is that what was lost and what was imposed in the journey of Bay Area Old World coffee. And I think this connects to the central theme of the symposium as I understand it, which is when food culture travels, what kinds of accommodations do people make in an effort to assimilate or preserve? And which ones do they not? Well, what got lost was the communal sense of time, institutional protection, and a resistance to productivity. So coffee becomes not so much a time out, but a leaning into. And I originally thought that I was going to talk about what does it mean when locals here or in the Bay Area or Northern California, I can't speak so much for SoCal as we call it, when we say, you want to grab a cup of coffee? It definitely does not mean fika. You kind of don't say no though, but it's a different kind of norm. But it doesn't mean necessarily you're drinking coffee. It just means let's find a time to get together and have coffee. It might end up being a happy hour, but it probably doesn't mean let's not talk about work. It probably means we need to talk. You want to grab some coffee? Or maybe, perhaps getting to know them. Is this somebody that you want to learn about outside of work? That does happen too. But we get the American cultural as well as that commercial grinder. So fika, you just had a presentation on fika. So I think that most of what I had on the slide is still correct as I understand it, but correct me if I'm wrong. Including you brought out the fact that it's the idea is that it's slang or that where it comes from. Well, I think that this is a moment here with all of us just hearing about fika and the Nordic conference to ask ourselves, what could we learn to reestablish? Because there's no reason why it has to continue this way. I mean, we have good coffee now. The getting together part should be the easier part. Of course, we were forced to watch these really beautiful pastries for 45 minutes. It's like, I mean, we don't have that. But those were beautiful. So what can we do with this? Well, we might ask ourselves, let's flip this a little bit and say, well, what if we had a word? And what would that word mean? We could all do this thought experiment here. Don't just take my word. But, well, let's see. We switched the syllables here. And we got fika off. It sounds like profanity with a Swedish accent, maybe? I don't know. That was not my intention. But as soon as I did a fika off, oh, God. Okay, well, anyway. And I think it could be a noun and a verb. So it captures the inverted cultural flow. If fika derives from reversing coffee, okay. But the entire social ritual fully institutionalized and commercialized in the service of individual productivity, performance, not community, or community is more of a branding device. Community is more a kind of, wrapper in it. It's not the core part of it. So, fika off. Hey, I'm an academic, giving an academic presentation here. I think this is just saying a similar thing, but I had AI create these things to, so I want to show them off. But the corporate managerialism, which I haven't mentioned, really when I say commercial grinder, I'm trying to find the right word that would move across these different eras or phases. But it's really a managerialism. It's a management thing. And the only aside here I would say is that in management, the whole idea is not to direct people to do someone, but it looks a lot like fika in a way. And fika, I would say, is a Swedish version of management and innovation. Because management, it is about coming together and being on the same page, having the same values, having the same internal motivations. But what's so striking about fika is the lack of hierarchy, and I'm not so naive to think that there would be no but the idea that everybody is there in the room and that it is very much the Swedish version of practicing democracy and practicing egalitarianism, that I do believe. I think that we have our own version of managerialism, but it's a superficial, topsoil version of this. Right? When your manager says, can we let's go grab a cup of coffee. We need to talk. Oh yeah, and I'm bringing a couple of other people along too. Doesn't land the same way. So to conclude, what could we learn from these Nordic rhythms and meetings? The Swedish model, fika, reminds us that quality coffee can coexist with institutionalized communal pause. That timeless kairos, and I had this more part of my presentation before, kairos is a Greek word that Stina been talking about here, which is it's a propitious moment. It's the moment where people come together and say, this is the time to act with the full knowledge in a kind of timeless moment. So by stepping out of that time, that agenda, that pressure, paradoxically, you do get creativity, because it's not about, okay, it's your turn, come up with something smart and genius. That's not the way to be creative. As soon as we let go of trying to be creative and we just let our curiosity wander, then we're in a room with other people doing that, as I'm sure the chefs in the room and other people know, that's when the magic happens, musicians, others. As soon as we stop trying to outperform each other, but we're all focused on the same curious, interesting thing, then you get an explosion of creativity and innovation. I don't think that this is something that's completely lost, especially here in the Bay Area. And I think the only critique of my own presentation here would be to say that I think the pushback to my talk would be that probably some other locals might say, well, that is our version of creativity, is that we lean in, we're very agenda-oriented and goal-oriented. After all, we got code to write. Well, as of a year ago, I don't know now, but so I think that you should also take whatever I'm saying more as food for thought, and that there are a lot of nuances and overlapping layers here. But I think that there is something to still be learned from the old world. That's really also the new world as well, in terms of the time and space, not just the taste or quality of the coffee. So, thank you.
Stina, do you want to come up this way? So we have about 15 minutes for questions and comments and reactions.
Run over here, Tom, please. Tom Dubois, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you both so much. And I wanted to ask a question of both of you, but particularly for the second talk, the role or the diminishment of the producer, of the maker of the cup of coffee, the worker or the brewer, that we sometimes turn into a coffee machine in American industrial life. How does that play a role in this transformation that happened? And is there a way in which the coffee maker is elevated in that fika culture?
No.
Well, I would be curious about that question first. Is the barista or the person making the coffee, is that an elevated role?
The barista culture to me is like a parallel culture to fika culture. It's just all focused on coffee and fancy coffee, better coffee, like that. Fika, it started as a coffee thing. Coffee is central, and the word has an origin that has to do with coffee. But the most important things are other things. Actually, not even for example, Swedes have been made fun of because we drink cappuccino at the wrong time of the day. It's supposed to be a morning coffee. But since for us, it's just a kind of coffee. I like this or I like that. The specific thing is not important. It really isn't important. So I don't think of the barista culture as, it's not so much part of it's a parallel thing.
Baristas are not really celebrated in the same way they are here.
No, there are competitions in Sweden also, but they would not come to mind for me as part of the fika culture, whereas other phenomena would. Like our home baking, for example, to me is very much a component of our fika culture. I don't know, but...
We have a question back here.
I just want to say just one quick thing, is that when Starbucks stopped using La Marzocco coffee makers, and I toured the La Marzocco factory a few years ago, the La Marzocco machines are themselves part of this whole culture and were fundamental. And then when they moved away from that, that was a step down in craft. And it's a slippery slope, once you start going away from that, less training, more predictability, calculability, sameness, homogeneity, and predictability, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it's part of the commercial grinder.
Let me make one more comment. In Sweden, we can fika really absolutely everywhere. But I'd say there are some main spaces at home, work, we've talked a lot about work, and at the cafe. And in Sweden, the most important place is really in the home. That's where we learn about fika culture. So it's not a cafe culture. And work then is kind of an extension of, where we find ourselves some other time of the day. Yeah.
So it's interesting because it sounds like to go to a cafe to fika is kind of by design would not fit with the vibe of fika.
No, it does. And we use it for the same purposes. But like when you said this thing of, boss says to the poor employee, let's go for fika. In Sweden, it would mean the opposite effect. Sort of.
Wow, I'm getting invited by the...
Yeah, it would be, we'll go and sort this out over fika. And both parties know this is going to end well because we are both intending to fix this. Mm-hmm. So it has a calming effect, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. But I could also, from the way you said it, feel like, oh my gosh, what is this? That would not be the case. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have one single question also in the end here. Could be a separate conference. You haven't said anything about the growers and how they are affected all over the world and how we went from South America to Africa to etc. Nobody said anything about the growers, everything about it. Drinkers.
I think that was the next speaker that's out there. I would say that within this presentation, trying to compare fika, it was more about the coffee break idea, right? So I'm tracking that. However, you're absolutely right. One of the main tensions throughout all of the phases of specialty coffee is that the growers, the farmers, the laborers have always gotten the short end of the stick, and it's never quite worked out very well. This is a short story of it. So those invisible processes and layers back is partly of the gravitational pull, but also the thing that they could never quite fully work out. Coffee prices and futures are set globally, and so commercial coffee prices still impact specialty coffee prices. And so all of these big market forces, no matter what any intentions of this company or practice might have, means that the laborers on the farms are still at the mercy of a bunch of forces that they're not controlled. This has been running throughout this period. I don't know, which aspect of the growers were you interested in? Or
I couldn't hear that. Say it again, I couldn't hear you.
Which aspect of the growing process or part were you interested in?
Well, it's suddenly it's a political tool and military and what's going on down in Colombia and all that. It's all moved over into almost drug trades too in a weird way. Maybe Trump is bombing the coffee ships coming up from Colombia.
Like I said, that's the next speaker. I don't know if my new word might fit here. I don't know. But no, the reason why, to talk about that even briefly opens up a Pandora's box, because the thing about coffee, whether it's the production or consumption or whatever, is that each place is a different story, even from farm to farm or region to region. There's so many things going on. And I was telling Stina that, because my main thing is visiting coffee farms. That's my main site of research. But I always think that to have, this is water, but it's my prop, to have a good cup of coffee is a small miracle. There's all the things that have to happen along the way. It's really amazing, and that creates all kinds of vulnerabilities. And so this does open the space for as it becomes popular, the conglomerates can absorb all of those risks over time as you have cycles of coffee up and down throughout the history of coffee. So.
And we'll go here.
Hi, I had a question on saying that British had their cultural tea, and also in industrialization they caffeinated their population, but it was a social structure. Sweden developed their fika as a social thing, and also at work, at labor, and we had our labor with coffee breaks, but now a lot of our labor is in tech, and they don't seem to have, constraints on hours of work. So you get into caffeinated all-day breaks. So I just wonder what happens when younger tech people hit Sweden with the culture of fika. Do you know, are there any anecdotes of what happens when those two meet?
I mean, if you spend any amount of time in Sweden without even trying, you begin absorbing, what it's about, I think. And I'd say, so one example of, the bringing fika pastries actually is my daughter-in-law. She's Indian, theater professor, and she was doing some teaching at Stockholm University when they spent 2 years in Sweden. And at one point she was meeting up with a sort of regular professor. They wanted to discuss grades. And Radhika brought some cardamom buns. And this Swedish professor, she was like, wow, and this is so tasty. And she went on. And Radhika felt, wow, this is really over the top. But my interpretation, and Radhika at that point didn't even think that she was doing anything special. My take on it is that it had become natural for her to pick up some buns that they were going to have fika together. And the Swedish professor then, wow, that, I wasn't conscious, I don't think, but appreciating the gesture as much as the tasty buns. Same as that Indian guy who baked muffins that looked like a mess. That you cared to do, that you knew to do it. You know this thing, you appreciate our culture somehow. Oh.
My take on that question is that coffee in Britain and England was very, very important before the American Revolution. Circa 1700, there were about 2,000 coffee shops. So Lloyd's of London was a coffee shop. Coffee was huge, it was by profession. There were also brothels upstairs. And so there was actually a whole huge movement of women posting broadsides to stop coffee shops because the men didn't want to have any intimate moments after they drank their coffee. So, yeah. But what happened was, of course, in the American Revolution, where they dress up as indigenous people, this is very strange history, then it becomes an identity thing, mixed with other movements of the high tea women, once again, because of the way it was so gendered in that country. Women made a bid to have more, men and women together, and so you get the tea culture along with the Americans got the coffee, we got the tea. So that was that. And then you mentioned something else about...
Yeah, the development of the coffee break with labor movement in your slide.
So yeah, you talk about like tech. What do they drink? Well, this is the rise of the caffeinated drinks that have been exponential. So yeah, and so many. Yeah.
Okay, I think we will wrap up the questioning there and go to a coffee break. Let us thank both Stina and David for interesting presentations and discussion.